What's up, gangsters? Time for another 10 or 20 minutes of technique video. This one is going to be about the versatility of lacquers, and specifically MRP lacquers, which are one of my favorite tools at my workbench. Let's take a look. Okay, so I'm going to just demonstrate a little bit of what I've been working on here with my Accurate Miniatures 1/48 B25 Mitchell. And this thing is a study in Olive-Drab tonal variation. A lot of people think colors like gray and Olive-Drab are boring, but that's only because they're not trying hard enough. When you look at the real thing, there are infinite tonal varieties, and these MRP lacquers, and really any lacquers, I mean, don't get me wrong about this. I'm not saying you can't do this with any other brand of paint. But lacquers in particular lend themselves to this process of generating a lot of tonal variety. And what I've been doing here is building up layers. I've got about, hell, I don't know, probably 7 layers on here as I've been building both tone and pattern variety. And the patterning starts with just, basic black basing and doing marble layers. I've been doing them with my spray stencils. Let me grab one out of the spray booth here. You can see, hold on a second. So using these things. These are great for a quick way to build that first marble layer and get a lot of nice random patterns. It's a little faster than doing it all by airbrush, but some of it does need to just be done by airbrush to give you variety. And that's also the point where I start masking in things that I want to have specific, like hard outlines of a different tone, like these control surfaces and this one weird panel right here. I gave them a different base coat color than the rest of the black basing, because like with these control surfaces here, for whatever reason, because of a paint difference or a material difference, because they are covered in fabric, they tend to fade differently on these Mitchells. So I wanted to build in a more tan tone. And the thing about these lacquers that makes them work really good for this, shut up, compressor. Apparently my compressor is in league with McDougall's compressor now. Anyway, the thing that makes these MRP lacquers in particular so good for this is that they're pretty translucent right out of the bottle. I did all the basic work with it, just like I said, just spraying it straight. But and then I start blending colors, and I am using this sand gelb mixed with the Olive-Drab to get where I want. I maybe should have picked a different Olive-Drab to start with, because this one turns out to be a bit darker and duller and bluer than I really wanted. I wanted something more like a little more tan and a little more green and a little more vibrant. Kind of like this color right here, if you can see it on my trousers. And that's pretty close to the color of Olive-Drab in the picture that I kind of use as my guide for this thing. And so it's taken me a little bit to get it exactly to the point where I wanted it, but I've been doing that just by a process of blending different tones and kind of keeping track of my ratios of the Olive-Drab to the sand gelb to get me where I want. And after I do the first couple of pattern layers, and you don't have to do more than one, I did more than one because after the first one I was definitely not happy with the tone. It was all really dark, like this area right here. And I just didn't like that. I knew I wasn't going to get where I wanted to be because of that. And being on a black base really does affect it, because even when this stuff is fairly opaque, the color of the base definitely does have an effect. So anyway, I did a second pattern layer, and that's where I started using the sponge and masking fluid technique. And I just have a little bottle of this liquid frisket stuff that I use. It's nice and thin, and so then I can use a sponge to apply it, and it creates real random splotchy patterns. And you can see that because I have yet a third pattern layer going on here, and you can see the texture of the masking fluid there. And it's really nice because it's pretty easy to remove. Basically, all you have to do is get like a rough paper towel and start rubbing, and it'll start to lift. This is, you can see it curling up there. This is a lot easier and a lot cleaner than the salt technique, and I think more controlled, because I can control where I put the masking fluid and yet still get random patterns, whereas with salt, it's, you know, kind of you're throwing the salt on there and seeing what you get. So there we go. And what I was specifically kind of masking over there was some of those darker tones that I had chipped using the hairspray method earlier. And I wanted to create a little bit more contrast in those areas. So that's why I used the masking fluid over those specific areas. So this will give me a really nice basis for working this area with oils to create that foot traffic pattern right there. Anyway, here's the number one super cool thing about these lacquers. I sprayed these literally like 10, maybe 15 minutes ago. And you can see I'm already handling it like a barbarian and not worried about fingerprints. I mean, you know, and you can pick these parts up literally within a couple of minutes after you shoot them. You know, don't be stupid and just jam your finger on there and really try to melt a fingerprint into it, because you might, but even, you know, 10 or 15 minutes later, you're pretty much out of fingerprint danger territory. And that's one of the great things about working with these lacquers that I really love. So to further what I'm saying about doing building the tones, what I then do is once I get pretty close to where I want to be, I start working with layers that are basically, I mean, you could call them filters, you could call them tints, whatever you want. But what I've got going there is once I've got the shade that I want, then I'm adding about 50% Mr. Color leveling thinner to it, and that makes a really thin brew. You can see there's not a lot of legs on that when it, you know, when I wash it up on the side of the cup there, and that lets me really sneak up on the flavor that I want. And I've still got some here in my airbrush, and I'll just pop a little on right here where you can kind of see what I'm talking about. It's nice because you just about can't screw up. See there? That's, I think I went shot a little bit heavy right there and made myself a little bright spot, but that's okay. One thing you'll notice is that it tones down a lot as it dries. And you can see still that there are some of the earlier patches from the sponge masking or the stencils that show through right there. It's just that light. And if you want to, you can obviously thin it even more, but that gives you that ability to really sneak up on exactly the tone and the shade that you want. Now, let's say that I want to actually do some real painting. I'm going to go away and put some full strength paint in this cup so that I can show you my next favorite thing about this stuff. Okay, so the task I need to do now is, if you look down here at this area just aft of the turret, you can see that I've got this square plate. Now, this was an extra sheet of aluminum that was riveted in place to keep the blast from the barrels of the Ma Deuces from blowing the rivets out. And they started putting these on both sides of the turret at the factory later on, but my understanding of the Doolittle Raiders is that they added this at the airfield in Florida where they were doing all the modifications to the planes prior to the raid. And so what I want to impersonate, and I don't know if this actually happened or not, but it's easy to imagine that after they put this aluminum sheet on there, that they applied some brand new paint. And so what I want to do is just spray only that panel and maybe a little bit of an overspray area around it. And so I've loaded the airbrush up with just some straight paint, so it'll be a lot darker. And this is just my Iwata Neo, spraying it at about 15 psi. It's a 0.35 millimeter needle, and hopefully you'll be able to see what I can do here. And hopefully I will actually be able to do it. Airbrushing something this tiny on camera is pretty ballsy. Okay, but there's one pass, and you can see that I was able to spray so small that I even have a kind of just a crappy spray paint job like you might actually find on something like this. Hopefully it's showing up on camera with the tonal difference there, but you can see how I'm able to just really sneak up on that. Okay, so there we go. That's pretty much what I wanted. I wanted to show just a little bit different. And if by the time I get to that stage, if it's not quite enough different to suit my tastes, I can always adjust that with some oils. But you can see what I'm saying. I was able to control that pretty tightly, and I oversprayed a little bit on purpose because, that probably would have happened in real life. The other thing that you can see is, look how shiny that is. This, MRP, once you get about 3 layers deep, it has a nice natural gloss to it that would be pretty good, for example, if you wanted to do like a 50s or 60s car finish and not do a clear coat to give it that super liquid wet gloss, because cars of that vintage really didn't have that. So you can see that you could pretty much go at that with just straight MRP. Another thing that's nice is if you have problems with this stuff, if you run into an issue where you got a goober of some kind or a piece of phlegm, like a hair or dust fleck or whatever in your work, you can literally stop spraying, go over, sand it out almost immediately, and this stuff feathers so nicely when you sand it, and then go right back to the spray booth and spray right back over your patch. I have several places on here where I've had to do that, but I had an even more drastic repair yesterday that I had to do. You can see right here there's a slight color difference, which I've intentionally left. I discovered after getting this all painted that that there was a big step between the fuselage and the canopy right there that I just hadn't noticed before, and it was huge. I mean, it was terrible. I couldn't tolerate it. So I filed and sanded that down to bring it a lot more flush with the canopy frame. And when I was done, I had an area that was sanded smooth, that kind of, that ran back in between these masked off windows. And I went and shot primer right in that area, came back, rescribed, re-riveted, and then doing the same kind of painting that I showed you right here, I just came back and sprayed that area back in, and I intentionally left the different tone to get, again, create an area of interest. Super easy to control, super easy to sand it down. Never really was nervous about my ability to do that because I knew that I would be able to blend that paint back in so nicely. Okay, and just as kind of another example of spraying really small and tight, freehand, I wanted to create a little bit of tonal variety on these cowl flaps. Don't ask me why. I mean, I've seen it in pictures. I just think it looks interesting and cool. And I did all of those freehand with my Neo. Same thing, if you look here on the bottom of the nacelle, I've done all of my gray and green color separation freehand with that Neo. And you can see it's pretty damn tight. There is virtually no overspray. And part of the reason too is because not only can I spray small, but I'm also making sure that when I shoot that line, that I'm angling towards the darker area, so that if I do get some overspray, that slight angle will carry it in here where it belongs and not put it out here on the gray. And you can do this kind of stuff with other paints. I'm not saying you can't, but it's very difficult to get a freehand spray that tight with normal acrylics, for example, because lacquers just atomize so much more finely than they do. And you can definitely see the differences. So anyway, there you go. Just some reasons why I think that these MRP lacquers are such good paints. Looks like I need to do a touch-up right there. I've been throwing this thing around on my bench for a week now, and it's scratched some paint off, but not a big deal at all. I'll just go and using the same techniques, I'll just go in and fix that. Maybe not all of it. It's kind of a nice natural weathering phenomenon. Okay, so there you go. Hopefully that gives you kind of a good overview of some techniques and things that these MRP lacquers make really easy. A couple of things I didn't mention. You may have noticed that while I was doing a little demo there, I didn't get a single bit of tip dry. I've been spraying 2-3 hours every day for the last week as I work on this Mitchell project, and I haven't had tip dry even once. It just doesn't happen with these paints, so that's always very nice. Also super quick and easy to clean up. The one big disadvantage with these paints though is they do stink. If you're going to use lacquers, you have to deal with that, and you do need good ventilation. I use a 22-inch Pache spray booth that works really good, but I also wear a 3M paint mask that's designed to filter vapors as well as particulates. So you do need good ventilation if you're going to use them, but hey, that's just smart craftsmanship at any rate. So anyway, I hope you found that useful, and if you are looking to move into lacquers, that this will inspire you to accomplish some good things. Thanks for watching. Much love.